Welcome to my channel. If you like it, leave a like and a comment. Enjoy watching. The first thing I saw when I stepped off the shuttle was firelight dancing against obsidian walls. Carexa Prime wasn't like the other military outposts. It pulsed with tension, like even the air didn't want you here. The Zalari didn't believe in comfort, only survival. And then she appeared. Commander Valira. Every soldier in the quadrant knew her name. Some called her the Bladed Storm. Others called her the Widowmaker. No one dared say either to her face. I'd seen pictures, battle reports, even shaky vids of her tearing through rebel lines like a goddess of war. None of them prepared me for the real thing. 7 feet tall. Silver blue skin marked with ancient scars. Dark braids bound tight, but a few strands danced loose around her jawline. She wore traditional Zalari command armor, spiked, angular, built to intimidate. And on her hip, twin curved blades. They hummed with barely restrained energy. Her eyes locked onto mine the second I stepped onto the landing pad. And in them, I saw it, pure, cold contempt. "You're the human," she said. Not a question. A sentence with venom on the end. I squared my shoulders. Lieutenant Commander Ren Walker. Assigned by Central Alliance Command as per treaty mandate. Her lips curled into something between a snarl and a smirk. Of course. Send a fragile little Terran to monitor our operations. Typical. I took a step forward, ignoring the half-dozen armed soldiers behind her. Didn't ask to be here, Commander. Just doing my job. You'll stay out of mine, she snapped, her voice like thunder cracking ice. You're not welcome here. You don't belong here. And if you get in my way, I won't hesitate to remove you. Her soldiers didn't move. Didn't blink. They weren't here to protect her. She didn't need protection. She was the weapon. I didn't flinch. Got it. Don't touch your stuff, don't slow you down, don't talk to your people. I'll be a ghost. But you don't scare me. That caught her off guard for a split second. Just a flicker in those burning eyes. Then she turned, motioned to her soldiers, and started walking away. But she didn't make it 5 steps before glancing back over her shoulder. Ghosts don't breathe loud, human, she said. Try not to get yourself killed. I watched her walk off, that perfect inhuman grace like the tension of a storm waiting to break. And maybe I should have been afraid. Maybe I should have regretted being stationed on this rock with a woman who clearly wanted nothing to do with me. But I couldn't stop watching her. Couldn't stop wondering why someone so fierce, so furious, looked at me like there was something else burning beneath the surface. That night, long after curfew, I passed by the hallway that led to her private quarters. The lights flickered, and for a second I saw movement in the shadows. Tall figure. Watching. I stopped. My skin prickled. Then she was gone. And I was left wondering if maybe she was just as curious as I was. The training field on Carexa Prime was brutal. No padding, no safeties, no forgiveness. The Zalari believed in pushing the body past its limits and then some. And today, I was the one they were pushing. A full-circle sparring ring, surrounded by jagged obsidian outcrops. Half a dozen Zalari warriors stood around me like wolves watching a wounded animal. My ribs already felt cracked. My breath came shallow. But I refused to fall. Commander Valira stood at the edge, arms folded, eyes narrowed, not giving an inch of approval. Again, she said coldly. The warrior in front of me charged. A blur of motion, all muscle and grace. I dodged the first strike, blocked the second, but the third, an elbow to the ribs, sent me sprawling onto the sharp volcanic ground. Pain lanced through my side. For a moment, everything slowed. My vision blurred. Blood welled from my mouth. I heard laughter from one of the warriors. But not from her. Valira stepped forward. Just once. Just enough to make the laughter stop. I tried to rise. My arm gave out. Before I could hit the ground again, someone caught me. Her hand gripped my forearm, firm and sure. Her strength was unreal. She lifted me with no effort at all. Her skin was hot from the exertion of watching, and her fingers tightened just slightly around mine as she pulled me up. "You fight like a fool," she said, but her voice was quieter now. "Rough, like gravel over silk. Yet you're still watching," I rasped, wiping the blood from my lip. Her eyes flared for just a heartbeat. She let go too quickly, like she didn't like what her hand had just done. But her fingers had lingered. I felt it. So did she. "Get medical," she told one of the soldiers. Then she turned and walked away, her braids swaying with each precise step. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about her touch. The quarters assigned to me were small, sterile, and cold. The lights were dimmed. The base had gone silent, except for the distant hum of systems and the occasional distant tremor from the unstable tectonic plates beneath Corex's surface. I lay on my bunk, shirtless, bandaged, bruised. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her again in the ring, felt her hand around my wrist. The heat, the strength, the sudden flicker in her eyes that didn't match her tone. Then I heard it, the faintest hiss, the door opening. I stayed perfectly still. Footsteps. There. Slow. Quiet. A shadow moved across the room, silhouetted against the faint red emergency glow from the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't need light to know who it was. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, near the wall, breathing, watching. Her outline was unmistakable, tall, powerful, wild hair loose around her shoulders. No armor, no weapons, just her, vulnerable and dangerous in the same breath. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, that maybe my pain was twisting my brain. Then I saw her hand lift, reach toward the door controls. She hadn't stepped any closer. She'd come just to see me. And then she left. The door hissed shut behind her. I stared at the ceiling long after that, adrenaline keeping me awake even through the pain. My body was broken, but my mind was burning. She told me to stay away. But that night, she came to my room. And the way she looked at me, like I was some threat she couldn't figure out how to eliminate, I knew it wasn't the last time she would. I didn't sleep after she left. My mind ran in loops, chasing the impossible. Why had she come? What did she want? What had stopped her from stepping closer? By morning, the pain in my ribs was worse, but I forced myself out of bed. I had too many questions, and something about the way she moved, silent, careful, almost conflicted, told me this wasn't just about a commander watching over a wounded soldier. I skipped the medbay. Instead, I followed a gut feeling and went walking along the outer perimeter. The air outside was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of scorched rock and ozone. Corexa Prime's moons hovered low in the sky, casting pale blue light over the jagged landscape. Far beyond the base's security line, cliffs dropped into lava trenches. I followed the sound of static, something faint, out of place. Then I saw her. Valira stood halfway between two obsidian spires, back to me, her hand pressed against a jagged outcrop that didn't look natural. It pulsed faintly with energy. Hidden tech. She was speaking in low, urgent tones. The language wasn't Alliance standard. It was Zalari, but clipped, fast, raw. I didn't move. I should have. I should have turned around and left before she sensed me. But I couldn't. There was something in her voice. A crack. A softness I hadn't heard before. Then her body tensed. She turned her head slightly. "You're following me now?" she said without looking. "I was walking," I replied, stepping into the open. Didn't expect to see you having a secret conversation with a rock." She didn't flinch. She turned slowly, her hand falling to the hilt of her blade. "Did you hear anything?" "Just enough to know you're not exactly filing daily reports to Central Command." A pause. A beat of silence. The air between us grew heavier. She stepped closer. Each movement precise. Controlled. "There are things happening you don't understand, human." "Then explain them." She stopped a foot away from me, her gaze burning into mine. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Something warred inside her. Duty, pride, fear. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet. Rough. "There's a rebel fleet. They've broken through the Western blockade. The next target is this base. They don't want the structure. They want someone inside it." "Let me guess," I said. "Me." Her jaw clenched. She didn't confirm it, but her silence said enough. "I'm just an observer." "They want an alliance monitor that badly." "Not just any observer," she said. "You're the son of Admiral Kess Walker. Your access codes, your biometric signature, you're worth more than a warship to them." The air shifted. A piece of the puzzle fell into place. My assignment here, it wasn't random. Someone high up had put me in a pressure cooker and waited to see what boiled over. "But you knew," I said, watching her face. "You knew before I got here." "I didn't know I'd care," she said quietly, as if the words physically hurt her to say. "I didn't know I'd come to regret it." I stared at her. For once, there was no mask. No sharp sarcasm. Just a woman standing between her duty and something she didn't have a name for. "Why would you care?" I asked. She looked away. Just for a second. "I've seen hundreds of humans. Soft, arrogant, full of noise. But you bleed and still fight. You take my hatred like it's not poison. You look at me like you see something beneath the armor. And that makes you dangerous." Dangerous. I stepped closer. "Or irresistible?" Her eyes snapped back to mine. "You think this is a joke?" "No. I think this scares the hell out of you." Her breath caught. Not from fear. We were close now. Too close. I could see the scar at the edge of her jaw, the way her throat moved when she swallowed hard. "I should kill you for what you know," she whispered. "Then do it." She didn't move. Instead, she leaned in, just enough for her breath to brush my cheek. "I won't protect you forever," she said. "Then don't," I replied. "Just don't lie to me again." She pulled away, suddenly colder, suddenly the commander again. But her voice, when she spoke next, still trembled. "Get inside. They'll strike before nightfall." And then she vanished into the mist like she had never been there at all. But I knew better. Because whatever line she had drawn between us, she had already crossed it. The alarms started screaming just after dusk. Red lights flooded the corridors, flashing like blood. Sirens howled through the walls like the base itself was panicking. Outside, the sky was burning. Streaks of fire cut through the atmosphere, incoming dropships, fast and heavy. The rebels had arrived. I was halfway to the command center when the tremor hit. The floor shuddered. A second later, the ceiling panels shook loose, scattering metal across the ground. Smoke began to pour from the far hallway. Chaos spread like wildfire. I turned the corner, and nearly collided with her. Valira was stripped of rank insignia, no helmet, no cloak, just raw power wrapped in dark combat gear. Her hair was unbound, falling wild around her shoulders, damp with sweat and ash. Her eyes locked on mine immediately, and something in her snapped into place. She stepped forward and grabbed my vest. "You need to come with me," she said. "Now. What happened to letting me die on my own?" Plans changed. We ran together through the crumbling corridors, side by side, ducking falling debris, dodging power surges from sparking walls. Her hand gripped my arm more than once, pulling me forward when I slowed, keeping me close like she couldn't bear the thought of being too far away. A heavy blast rocked the base. A nearby wall split open. Heat surged in. We stumbled into a narrow storage chamber, the door sliding shut behind us. The lights flickered. Everything was quiet for a moment, just the low hum of machinery and the distant echo of battle outside. I leaned back against the wall, panting. Blood trickled from my temple. She was standing in front of me, body taut, chest rising fast, face lit by the flickering emergency light. "You knew this was coming," I said. She didn't answer. "Why didn't you tell command? They would have evacuated you. I couldn't let them take you. I needed time." "Time for what?" She stepped closer. Her eyes burned through me. The tension in her shoulders wasn't just from the fight. It was from something heavier. Something far more dangerous. "I needed time to figure out what this is," she said. What is?" "This," she said sharply, then lowered her voice. "You, me, the way I feel when you walk into a room. The way I find myself listening for your footsteps in the hall. The way I hate that you got under my skin." She stopped just inches away, and I needed time to decide if I was going to do something about it. The words hung between us, heavy and electric. I looked into her eyes. There was no command there now. No rank. Just heat. Hunger. Longing she couldn't admit until this very moment. I reached up, brushing a smear of soot from her cheek. Her skin shivered under my touch. She didn't pull away. "Do it," I whispered. "Whatever you were going to do." She stared at me for one more heartbeat. Then she kissed me. Hard. Fierce. Like she was trying to pour everything she'd ever repressed into that one moment. Her body slammed against mine, her hands fisting in my shirt. Her mouth was heat and desperation. She tasted like fire and something sweeter buried beneath it. She kissed like she fought, with no hesitation and no mercy. I kissed her back just as fiercely. Our bodies pressed together, the heat between us threatening to rival the chaos outside. My fingers tangled in her hair. Her breath caught when I pulled her closer, when I pressed my lips down her neck. She growled low in her throat, a sound both dangerous and possessive. But then, the floor shook violently. Somewhere above us, metal shrieked. The lights flickered once, then died completely. She pulled away, breathing hard, eyes wide and glowing faintly in the dark. "They're inside the perimeter," she said. "We have minutes. Maybe less." She turned toward the exit. "I'm not letting them take you." I grabbed her hand before she reached the door. "You're not doing this alone," I said. She didn't look at me, but her fingers squeezed mine. "You're mine now," she whispered. "They'll have to tear you from my hands." We ran. Together. Through the dark, through the fire, toward whatever waited beyond the doors. But something had changed. Something had snapped between us, and it wasn't going to break. Not now. Not ever. The doors hissed open to hell. Smoke filled the air. Sirens wailed overhead. The rebel forces had already breached the eastern hangar and were pushing fast through the interior corridors. I could hear the thudding of boots, the snap of pulse rifles discharging, the chaos of screams swallowed by gunfire. Every wall was scorched and vibrating with the weight of a war already lost. Valira didn't hesitate. She moved like she was born for this. Her blades were already in her hands, drawn so fast I barely saw the motion. The twin arcs of polished metal shimmered with kinetic charge, leaving trails of light with every movement. We moved through the ruins like shadows. Twice, she pulled me out of the path of gunfire before I even knew it was there. Her body shielded mine, her arms stronger than any armor. I kept close, firing short bursts when I could, but she was the storm. I was just trying to keep up. Around the corner, 2 rebel soldiers spotted us. They shouted something, probably telling us to surrender. She answered with a blade to the throat of the first before he finished a syllable. The second didn't even get to raise his weapon. I shot him in the chest. Valira turned her head toward me, blood spattered across her cheek, breath ragged. "Not bad," she muttered. I gave a shaky smile. Starting to enjoy this kind of date. Another explosion shook the corridor, and we were off again. Down the hall. Into the barracks. Past the burning remains of a wall I'd walked by that morning. Then we reached the central shaft. It was a vertical drop, 20 meters down, leading to the control nexus, last stronghold of the base, buried deep underground. We needed to activate the auto turrets and lockdown codes. If we didn't, the rebels would have full access to the Alliance database. She hooked her weapon to her back, wrapped one arm around my waist. "Hold tight." "Wait, what?" She jumped. We plummeted together through fire and smoke, gravity pulling us fast, heat tearing at our skin. She twisted at the last second, using her boots to absorb the shock as we landed hard in the lower chamber. Metal groaned beneath us, but it held. I stared at her, breathless, heart pounding. "You are insane." "You're the one following me," she said, eyes burning. We didn't get a second to rest. A blast door blew open on the far side, and half a dozen rebels poured through. They were armored in mismatched gear, weapons glowing, snarling with fury. Valira threw me behind a support beam. "Stay there." "Like hell I will." I stepped out beside her and fired. What followed was a blur of war and instinct. She moved like lightning, blades singing through air and flesh. I covered her flanks, picking off anyone who got too close. One of them rushed me. My side screamed with pain from a reopened wound, but I put him down with a clean shot through the neck. Then another hit me. A blast to the ribs. I flew back, crashing into a console. Everything went black for a moment. My ears rang. I tasted blood. When I opened my eyes, Valira was kneeling over me. Her hand gripped mine tightly. Her other pressed hard against the wound. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "I'm fine," I coughed. "Liar." She looked down at me like she wasn't sure whether to kiss me or kill me. "I told you to stay behind cover. I told you I'm not letting you fight alone." She stared at me for a long moment, her hand still pressed to my side. Then her forehead touched mine, just for a heartbeat. "I'm scared," she said so quietly I almost missed it. She'd never admitted that to anyone. Not in 100 years. But right now, with my blood on her hands, with rebels storming her base, she said it to me. "I'm not." My voice was weak, but I meant it. I wasn't afraid. Not with her here. The last few rebels were dead or retreating. For now, the chamber was ours. She helped me sit up, one arm around my shoulders, cradling me close. Her body was still trembling from the fight, but her grip was steady. "We have to make it to the core," she said. "Activate the purge protocol. It's the only way to stop them from getting what they want." "Then let's go," I said. She looked at me like I was made of glass. Like she wanted to lock me away somewhere the universe couldn't touch. But instead, she nodded, and pulled me to my feet. Side by side, bloodied and burning, we made our way toward the heart of the base. And no matter what waited for us there, we'd face it together. The path to the core was a tunnel of broken steel and flickering light. We moved slowly now. My side was on fire, every breath tight, but I wouldn't let her see me fall. Valira stayed close, one arm around my back, her presence steady and grounding. Her blades were stained with blood. Her eyes never stopped scanning, calculating. The rebel signal was everywhere. They were jamming communications, slicing into security, closing the gap. We had minutes left before they overwhelmed the final barriers and took control of the entire base. The core chamber was the last defense. And once we activated the purge, it would destroy everything above us, cutting off their path and buying the Alliance time to retaliate. But it came at a cost. I saw it on her face before she said a word. The control panel sat in the center of the glowing core. Exposed cables sparked from the ceiling. Warning lights spun red across the walls. She walked ahead of me, her boots heavy now, her shoulders tense. She looked at the override terminal, then back at me. "There's no remote option," she said. "The purge system. It requires a manual hold." My stomach sank. "You mean someone has to stay behind?" "Yes. And you already decided it would be you." She nodded once, no hesitation in her body, but everything in her eyes was chaos. "Valira." "No," she cut me off. "You're the reason we made it this far. You're the reason the Alliance still has a chance. You still matter. So do you. I'm Zalari. I was born for war. Trained to die for my people. Maybe you were trained wrong." She turned her head, her jaw tight. "I'm not letting you throw yourself away for me. And I'm not letting you die thinking you're alone." We stared at each other across the smoke and fire, the hum of the core vibrating between us. She took a slow step toward me, then another. Her armor was cracked, her lips bruised, her breath shaky, but she was still the strongest thing I had ever seen. She pressed her forehead to mine. "You ruined everything," she whispered. "Yeah," I said, smiling despite the pain. "But maybe everything needed to be ruined." And then I kissed her. This time there was no firestorm outside, no chaos between us. Just us. Real. Fair. Her lips moved with mine like she'd been waiting forever to do it without fear. I wrapped my arms around her, and she melted into me like the war didn't exist. When we pulled apart, there were tears in her eyes. She blinked them away. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "Then don't." I turned to the control panel. Started working. "What are you doing?" "Rerouting the sequence." "There's no time. I'm not stopping the purge. I'm setting a timed delay." Her eyes widened. "That's impossible. It's not clean, and it's not safe. But it'll give us 90 seconds after the system arms to escape. We just have to move." She looked at me like she couldn't decide whether to kiss me again or punch me in the face. "You're insane." "I'm in love." Her breath caught. The fire in her chest dimmed for one heartbeat. "You really mean that?" "Yes." Her lips parted. No words came. But she didn't need them. The look in her eyes said everything. And for the first time, I saw the warrior fall away. Saw the woman behind the steel. And she wasn't afraid anymore. She reached for my hand. "Then run with me." We hit the command. The purge sequence began. The floor rumbled. The alarms blared louder than ever before. We ran. Up the service shafts. Through fire and smoke. Over fallen beams and through shattered walls. My body screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. Neither did she. We moved like one breath, one heart. The detonation roared behind us as we launched out through the emergency lift shaft. The explosion chased us up the tunnel, a monstrous force of fire and wind. We dove into a bunker access point just as the base behind us erupted into flame. The blast threw us forward. Dust swallowed the world. Then everything went still. I opened my eyes. She was above me, shielding me with her body. Her hair fell across my face like a curtain. "Are you alive?" she asked, voice raw. "Barely," I groaned. Her smile was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She kissed me again. Slower. With purpose. Then she lay beside me, chest rising and falling with mine. Outside, the rebel signals vanished. Backup was arriving. The Alliance had survived the breach. And we had survived each other. Hours passed. The air cleared. And in the aftermath, she never left my side. Days later, when the recovery team landed, she stood beside me as I gave my report. Not as a commander. Not as my enemy. But as mine. And when we left Carexa Prime together, hands clasped, battle-scarred and unbroken, she whispered something only I was meant to hear. You don't belong to the war anymore. You belong to me. I kissed her under the twin moons, and she didn't look away. She had given up everything. But she kept me. And I would never let her go.